Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. My name is Xavier England. I am the president of Turning Point USA at SUNY Oswego, our college Republicans chapter at SUNY Oswego. And I am super happy to welcome you guys to our Isabel Brown event tonight. Though I won't be the one introducing her. Instead, I want the brains behind this event, our wonderful secretary and events coordinator, Eliza. You want to come up and introduce her?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. I know I look a little weird with two mics, but it's for a purpose, I swear. So tonight we're hosting Isabel Brown, and she is a host through the Daily Wire of a podcast show called The Isabel Brown Show. Tonight she will be talking to us about relationships because February has Valentine's Day and it's the month of love. So let's all give a big round of applause for Isabel Brown.
Awesome. The month of love. I love it. That's awesome. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. How are you guys doing this evening? Oh, that was lame. I know it's February and it's cold, but we have a fun, intimate group here tonight. How is everyone actually doing? You guys hanging in there? Campus life is good. We're halfway, maybe almost through the semester. Maybe almost to spring. I don't know. It is so fun to be back with you on campus this year. It's my first campus event of the semester, which I'm incredibly excited about. But more importantly, this is my second campus event since my mentor, Charlie Kirk, was killed on a college campus 6 months ago. And it certainly is a different world than it was even just 6 months ago. But just so you all know, those of us who have worked with and loved Charlie for many, many years are so passionate about being back on campus. And we're going to continue doing it every day here on out, whether it's this school year or moving forward as well. My heart is so much with where you guys are at right now as student activists and the continued mission and work that you are putting in on the front lines of what we call this culture war every single day. And that's a little bit what I want to talk to you guys about tonight, as well as our theme for the month of February. And the biggest priority that I have this evening is just to open it up to questions for all of you guys, because we are a smaller, more intimate group, and I think we'll have a lot more fun if we're going back and forth. It is 2026, which is crazy to think about, particularly when you think about what this year means in the context of history, not just as a nation, but even looking past that. 2,000 years ago, the world changed forever when an unexpected, courageous group of young, mostly uneducated individuals took up the call to follow Christ out of the shadows, out of the least expected community on earth, to change humanity forever. And even before then, when a young, uneducated teenage girl, Mary, had an invitation from God incarnate himself to bring salvation to humanity into the world. Her courageous yes shocked everyone, but ultimately fundamentally changed humanity. Thank God for her yes. 250 years ago, the world again forever changed when a young ragtag group of uneducated individuals, for the most part, unexpected young men and women were willing to put their lives on the line to fight like never before in facing the world's largest superpower, to reinvent a country, to reinvent society on the basis of our identity as one nation under God. And thank God for their yes. Our founding fathers and mothers, by the way, were not what you often see where I live in Washington, D.C., and little bust statues and big, beautiful paintings in the Smithsonian. They certainly weren't what you see in your AP US history textbooks or even here on campus as college students. Typically, we describe them as three pretty demeaning words. What are they, our founding fathers? Old white men, right? Old white men, like ancient, shriveled up old white men, geriatric old white men who couldn't possibly understand what the next generation needed, and their children, they were just fighting to preserve what they had. Wrong, by the way, on July 4th, 1776. Most of our founding fathers were 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. Thomas Jefferson, as one of the older in the crowd, most credited with writing our founding documents, was only 33. They were teenagers, essentially, whose power and influence could not merely hold a candle to the raging fire of the British Empire, and yet they had the courage and foresight to say yes to God's call to transform the world. 6 months ago, our world again forever changed when someone possessed by the forces of evil viciously took the life of our friend, and in many ways, the leader of the young conservative movement on a college campus, a lot like this one, Charlie Kirk. And I don't know about you, I remain utterly devastated 6 months into what can only be described as a generational turning point that is going to change society forever. But it's also beginning to become clear that there is a greater plan in all of this, too. That we are watching the good and the beautiful and the true in society become louder and bolder and more unafraid in fighting evil than ever before. All because one young man had the courage to stand up and to say yes. Charlie's life lit a spark in the hearts of millions of young people all over the world, but through his death, I think we're witnessing a revolutionary revival that is once again transforming humanity all over again, inspiring countless young people across the globe to simply say yes to God's call in your life as well. Today, here with the incredible campus activism groups that have invited me to join you on campus today, my question for you is, are we all willing to answer that same question? Are we willing to answer the call? Are we willing to say, yes, here I am, Lord, send me? When we see these pivotal moments in history, I think it's really easy to say that could never be me, right? I could never be a Mary. I could never be the apostles. I could never be the founding fathers. I could never be a Charlie Kirk. I'm just me. I'm a college student. I'm suffering through my classes right now. I'm just a girl. I'm just a boy. I'm just a TikTok personality. I'm just whatever. And it's so easy for us to qualify the limits of our potential to impacting humanity for the better based on everything that could possibly hold us back. But the longer I continue to learn about the history of our nation and the world, and the more we are watching real history play out before our eyes in real time right now in 2026, I'm realizing that the most uniquely impactful individuals were not unique at all. They weren't uniquely called to greatness before they were all born. They weren't given special opportunities that the rest of us weren't, or special gifts that we couldn't see necessarily before they came into power themselves. We all are called to transform the world for the better. And to change the world from the inside out doesn't require a special set of skills given to you that no one else possesses, but a quiet, simple, courageous yes. A yes to stand up every single day to quietly say, here I am, Lord, send me. When I began my journey in the conservative movement in 2017, I certainly did not have a loud microphone or a million followers on social media, the ear of the President of the United States, or the opportunity to go on national television multiple times a week. I was a college student, just like all of you, not remotely interested in working in media or politics. I was pre-med. Any scientists in the house? We need good conservative scientists. None of you. That's okay. You need to go recruit scientists to join all of your organizations. And I had this deep, defining passion for the pursuit of objective truth. It's why I went into science in the first place, because whether you start in the second grade learning the scientific method, or you go all the way through graduate school getting your master's in something really niche and specific in biomedical sciences like I did, science has always been about asking the biggest questions about the universe, finding out all of the supporting evidence and details and asking the tough questions, and then arriving at an objectively true answer. We could weed out fantasy and reality. We could understand fact from fiction. Hey guys, welcome. In 2017, I realized in all of my classes in anatomy and physiology and biochemistry and organic chemistry that my classes, most of the time, weren't even really about the pursuit of objective truth anymore. We spent 6+ months learning about all of the amazing miracles that have to happen when a child is being formed in the womb to become born into this life, only then to be told after we take the exam that abortion does not end a genetically unique human life, and that it's something you probably all will be forced to participate in as doctors. We learned, of course, about the importance of XX and XY chromosomes, only then to be told later on that, your gender is kind of just something you can pick every single day. Or we even spent time arguing at the time about the evil orange white supremacist guy that had just been elected to be the president of the United States, something I was incredibly excited about, but most of my peers on campus weren't. And as I found myself sitting on a campus of 33,000 plus students, really feeling isolated and alone as an outspoken Christian and conservative, I felt a tugging at my heart to want to get involved more, to be louder, to give the microphone to other students that I was sitting with in my college classes so that we all had the opportunity to be much more transparent about our values and to influence the lives of others. Around that time, I received a targeted Facebook ad for this random organization I'd certainly never heard of before called Turning Point USA for an event they were putting on that June for young women in particular. And I recognized a few names on the flyer. Ben Shapiro, I'd seen a few YouTube videos for. Somebody once had told me when I was a student that I looked kind of like this girl, Tommy Lahren, who was speaking. This was when the conservative movement was this big. And it was being put on by a young man named Charlie Kirk, who I certainly had never heard of before, but at the time was just a young man wearing ill-fitting suits and white New Balance dad sneakers who had no idea what he was doing, but had a heart to change the world. I never, ever set out to have an audience of my own or to be working in this movement, but I courageously first said yes to just attending that first conference to fight on the front lines of our nation's culture war and to take back our country for our generation. In the years that have followed, I never could have dreamed that I would be engaging in media or politics for the rest of my career. I, as you know, wanted to be a doctor throughout all of my educational journey until Charlie Kirk encouraged me to abandon my pursuit of medical school, throw away my plans for my life, and to lean into what God had planned for me instead. In my wildest dreams, I could have never prepared for God to grow my little Instagram account that I started posting on the day after college graduation from about 100,000 followers to well over 1 million completely organically in just a year, as I sought to just make people laugh, to remind them that it's okay to poke fun at our often broken culture, to give them hope and to share the truth with them every single Instagram reel or TikTok video at a time. I never dreamed that I would be spending 2026 sitting in the Oval Office twice with the President of the United States, or shaking hands with our new American Pope at the Vatican in Rome, or even launching my own show with the Daily Wire. I never imagined the ups and downs of dating in my 20s, which we'll talk a little bit about tonight, and that just 4 months after a heartbreaking, heart-wrenching, horrible breakup and feeling all alone in the world, I would meet my incredible husband, who I have the honor and privilege of loving and serving every single day. I could have never imagined that I would be a mom at 28 years old to the most beautiful little girl in the entire world, whose eyes and smile light up every room that she enters, and whose intelligence and curiosity, and let's face it, stubbornness that she gets from her dad, I just want that on the record, is already getting the better of her. Yet here I stand in utter wonder at the things that God has been able to accomplish in my life, what God has turned my life into, because I had the quiet courage, mostly instilled in me by my friend Charlie, to throw my plans away from my life and to simply surrender everything to God, to say, "Here I am, Lord, send me." Just after Charlie was so violently taken from us on a college campus, we heard his wife address the nation within just a few days in the wake of Charlie's assassination, as she shared with us that Charlie's ultimate dream for his vocation in life wasn't to become the president of the United States, though I think we all kind of knew eventually he was going on that trajectory, those of us that worked for him for a long time. It wasn't to turn everyone into a conservative or a registered Republican, to vote for the right guy to sit in the Oval Office, or to make sure that the bills that Congress was debating were making sure young people were set up to succeed. But in reality, Erica revealed that Charlie's biggest passion in life was always to revive the American family. That if nothing else, if he could have created a new path for more families to be created in our generation as we continue to grow up into adulthood, he would have considered his life to be a success. I think he accomplished that goal in much more ways than he ever realized, and certainly that has been the case in my life. My precious, beautiful family would not exist today without Charlie Kirk, as I met my husband working at Turning Point USA at one of those infamous TPUSA conferences, and my daughter is now here as a result. And as Charlie has fought so hard to revive the family, and now those of us with microphones are picking them up in his legacy, I also don't find it coincidental that the single biggest target being put on the conservative movement from the mainstream media, from many of the radical leftist organizations that are trying to take down what your organizations are fighting for every day on college campuses, the entertainment industry, politicians, and so much more. They're placing this target uniquely on the American family. Throughout the 2020s, it's becoming increasingly obvious to me with every passing day that there is a unique cultural war being waged against the family, especially in America, but across Western civilization. No longer are the conversations we're having in the conservative movement what I was talking about in 2017, like making sure we had better tax policies and hurting the economy through socialism was so bad for our generation. The consequences of communism, Stalinism, and why we had to fight against totalitarian authoritarian ideologies. But rather, the conversations we are having today in 2026 and beyond are not about these things. They are about the significance culturally that we are seeing from some of the loudest voices in society to undermine and eradicate God's design for humanity. Importantly, the family unit by these forces of evil. It's interesting to me that some of the loudest voices on the internet today are coming from supposedly polar opposite ends of the political spectrum, and yet they're saying virtually the exact same things. Young men, when you're getting targeted with all these videos on your Instagram and TikTok and X algorithms from the red pill alpha male podcast bros telling you that the only way that you can be a strong masculine man and contribute to society is by sleeping with as many young women as possible, never settling down, never committing your life to your best friend, having as many kids with as many different women as possible, driving 26 Lamborghinis and making millions of dollars, the same messaging is being portrayed to women through the lens of radical left-wing feminism, that the only way to be an empowered and liberated and sexually free young woman is to sleep with as many men as possible and never allow a man to pin you down with the stranglehold of marriage, which clearly is just a tool of the patriarchy, to never want to have children, and in fact to sacrifice the lives of your children on the altar of the abortion industry so that you can continue furthering your career, your personal friendships, all of the things that you selfishly want and desire every day. I can't tell you how many videos I've seen from these so-called pro-feminism women about how important it is for us to be radically selfish in our lives rather than looking for ways to serve others in our community. One appears to be from the left and one appears to be from the right, but these radical voices are aimed at doing exactly the same thing to attack God's design for humanity and the ways that we were designed to complement one another and to make each other stronger. Emma Watson, just a few months ago, said in her first podcast interview in a very, very long time that there is an extreme pressure to get married in society. Where that pressure is, I don't know, because I'm only seeing pressure on young people not to get married. But she actually said this: the pressure to get married is a violence against young people. I guess everything is violence, I guess, besides actual violence in 2026, but you guys understand that better than most, and we don't have to get into it. And this is the rhetoric that they are pounding into Generation Z day in and day out, with the expectation that we will abandon any pursuit for marriage or family in our own futures, despite that being the most solid foundation humanity has ever had to fall back upon throughout the last several thousand years. They build upon this, and the media then tries to convince you that especially for young women, you should never even want to have children in the first place, because having children is a violence. It certainly is a violence to you. Anyone see the girl with the list TikTok trend all the time with the hundreds of reasons why you should never want to be pregnant because it's so horrible? I can tell you I never felt more beautiful or more personally fulfilled physically than when I was pregnant, and the experience of giving birth to my daughter was not scary or life-threatening or any of the things that you often hear on social media. Not to discount the experiences that are like that, but truly it was the most beautiful day of my life that I would live over and over and over again. The mainstream media then jumps in and says it's a violence against other people and Mother Earth as well if you want to have children in the first place. Right before the 2024 election, the Los Angeles Times actually ran the headline, "It is shameful to want to have children." It is shameful to want to have children. Their reasoning for that, of course, being that the world is so hyper overpopulated that you are evil and going to destroy resources for society and kill other human beings because we will all starve to death if we bring more babies into the world. Of course, now we are starting to learn that we do not have an overpopulation crisis in most of humanity. We have a radical underpopulation crisis in almost every single country on Earth that we are desperately trying to figure out innovative ways to solve for. And thank God for people like Elon Musk bringing that awareness to everyone's attention this last year. They then translate that violence into the scientific experts, right? So they have to knock down every single cultural domino to make you believe that what God designed for our lives and what is so, so beautiful and fulfilling is actually evil. The truth is lies and lies is truth concept. The last Surgeon General under President Joe Biden, the top doctor, top ranked doctor in the entire country, in one of his last acts as the Surgeon General, actually put out a public health warning that parenting is bad for your health. You can look this up. I'm not making it up. Parenting is bad for your mental health. And his reasoning for this was beautifully ironic. It seems that having children apparently makes you more lonely. It isolates you. It makes you more lonely by bringing more people into the world. So the antidote to that is to make sure that you have no children and you live alone and you never get married and you never have any children, because that's going to make you feel less lonely and help your mental health. We truly live in the upside down these last several years. I mean, for years, you haven't even been able to call women women, right? Because that's a violence against some people, to understand that men and women are fundamentally different, that XX chromosomes are fundamentally different from XY chromosomes, and men can never become women, and women can never become men. Instead, women are boiled down to the most asinine, disgusting, revolting, and frankly offensive labels, because no one wants to offend the non-women or everyone out on the fence out there about womanhood. So we're people who menstruate, or we're birthing people, or we're chest feeders. Real thing, by the way. And we've let this go so far that chest feeding doesn't just refer to biological women who think that they are men, who are in fact breastfeeding their children. No, we've become so radically inclusive in America that we are actually using artificial hormones and lactation supplements to induce lactation in biological men to feed their children with, I don't know, juice instead of breast milk. It's disgusting, but this is the level of attack that we have experienced on God's design for humanity. Embryos are now being grown in laboratory facilities all across our country instead of celebrating the miraculous experience of the beginning of life as it was designed to be. There's a startup company in San Francisco called Conception, very dystopian, feel free to look this up for yourself, that brags on their own website that they are creating new human beings, new human embryos, entirely derived from stem cells, so that no sperm and no egg really has to be involved in the process. We'll just make new human beings out of pluripotent stem cells. Any science nerds in the house will know that is incredibly dystopian and something we should never be advocating for in society, but we're allowing for under the guise of compassion somehow, which ironically is not compassionate at all. And just recently, Sam Altman, who you may recognize the name, is the owner of OpenAI, the parent company for ChatGPT, and one of the most powerful people on the planet, announced his own preventative startup company that is selectively editing genes to engineer children to be free from preventable diseases in the future. If you think that's bad, you should go to the website pickyourbaby.com, where you will artificially engineer whatever designer child you want in a laboratory, rather than experiencing the beautiful union of a husband and a wife out of their love, creating a child that comes from their own DNA. This has escalated to unprecedented levels in the last couple of years and is starting to get to the point that it feels like we're reading a bad sci-fi novel or something out of George Orwell's Nightmares instead of a radical headline that we would have seen in the New York Times or a crazy CNN hit piece even just 5 years ago. A few weeks ago, I saw photos going incredibly viral of a conference that was held here in New York, it was in the city, of an all-male conference for an organization called Men Having Babies, where a room far bigger than this one was filled to the brim with thousands of men talking about how to rent a woman's body to purchase a child through commercial surrogacy, not just in a gay marriage or a gay union, but in particular, how single men could purchase a child through commercial surrogacy, free from any of the burdens of being tied down by a woman for the rest of their life. And if that sounds pretty scary, it should, but it's nothing compared to the fact that as we speak in China, they are getting ready to roll out birth robots They're real and they're in production right now as we speak in China. This, of course, while 1 in 7 couples in America is currently struggling with infertility, and we don't even have the courage or the moral clarity in our country, in society, to ask why or to try to do something about that. Instead, we shove you down the pipeline of a $33,000 per round IVF cycle, and may even offer to cut the cost substantially with these $14,000 birth robots coming off of factory lines in China. We could keep going, and there are endless examples that you all know intimately. You see them on your social media, you hear about them constantly in the communities that you are a part of, but one thing is abundantly clear. This so-called progressive left that we generally have accepted for years and years and years, we agreed on where we were going as a country, we just disagreed on how to get there, is attempting to radically rewrite the framework for society and is waging a war against the family specifically in every single facet of culture, not just to attack it, but to erase it entirely until God's perfect design for humanity is completely forgotten about as an era of bygone history in our postmodern culture. The thing is this, make no mistake about it, this is an injustice. And I think when we start borrowing some of the language from the people that we're constantly debating with, it starts to sink in for people. This is an injustice. The family is by far the strongest building block that humanity has ever experienced through any society in our history. The happiest and the healthiest and the wealthiest people of all time are, shocker, married men and women with children, and they are far substantially happier and more fulfilled in their lives when they are pursuing Christ on top of all of it. I don't tell you any of this to make you feel bad if you aren't married or to suggest that your life is going to be meaningless if marriage is not the vocation that you're called to or parenting isn't. To the contrary, actually, I tell you this because it's something so worthy and beautiful of our pursuit as young people, and it is constantly under attack from every single direction in America today. We are all made in the divine image of God, and the experiences that were designed for us through intimacy, through marriage, through commitment, through parenthood, through pregnancy, and so much else out there for you is worth us running after with full speed, open hearts, and a deep passion. Charlie used to get hate for this all the time, and people used to say that he was this evil, radical misogynist because he was telling women on college campuses that they should get pregnant and have children, as many children as possible, and he would tell young people to get married way before you ever think you're ready for it and to have way more kids than you think you can afford, ever. People thought that was a radical proposition and a really crazy thing to say to young people when all of the other expert voices out there are saying, you have plenty of time to grow up, go live your life, be wild and crazy, sow your oats, have a million jobs, move to a million cities, travel all the time, don't let yourself be tied down. But the thing is, Charlie, and now myself and so many others, aren't telling you this about the importance of the family and fighting so hard for it because we want you to be feeling bad about it. We don't want you to feel like you're missing out on things today, or that if your life goes in a different direction, you're somehow less worthy than in society. We tell you this instead to encourage you to seek more than the broken lies our culture has to offer, because we want more for you than the radical left. In case you haven't figured it out yet, the left wants you to be miserable, fat, ugly, unhappy, poor, everyone poor, actually, because that's what equity looks like in an actual perfect socialistic system. They want you to be unfulfilled, lacking direction, lacking a compass, lacking a sense of moral clarity. We want you to have purpose, to be happy, to share the love of Christ with the other people in your life, and to leave behind a legacy that is far bigger from your own life, your own inner circle, and the immediate things that you can touch every day when inevitably we move on from this life into the next. We want you to put your priorities in the right order. And ultimately, we want our country to put our priorities in the right order. God, then family, then country. St. Mother Teresa has been on my mind a whole lot lately when it feels like the entire world is spinning out of control and we lack the moral clarity to even answer the most basic questions in society, like what is a woman, or should we have free speech, or what are we even fighting for every day. She once was famous for saying that if you want to change the world, you should go home and love your family. And I think there's something so beautiful in understanding that in order to change our country, in order to change people's hearts and minds, in order to change people's souls, The greatest legacies we can leave behind happen in the quiet, simple acts of courage that we have in our own lives, in the families that we're building, in the conversations that we're having with our loved ones, in the act of going to church on Sunday morning and bringing a friend along with you. If I've learned anything through the awesome, powerful, very sometimes frustrating, but overwhelmingly beautiful journey of motherhood this last year, as my daughter approaches her first birthday this spring, it's this: my life, and even the things I experience in my own home, isn't supposed to be about me. Everything in my culture says that, right? Everything says embrace radical selfishness. It's all about you. Chase your dreams, follow your heart. Make sure no one ever encroaches upon your safe space. Your feelings will guide you. Your career is the most important thing and should always supersede a relationship or a sacrifice or a service to someone else. But the truth is, we were not meant to be the main characters of our own stories or our own lives. God is supposed to be the main character and the main center of our lives. The most sanctifying moments of my life have all happened in this last year when I was way past the end of my rope and when I just threw up my hands and I said, God, that's it. I can't do this. Take it away from me. I can't put one step in front of the other. And it was in those moments right there where God's abundant grace met me and where it meets others as well. For you, it might not be rocking your baby to sleep at 3 a.m. after you haven't slept a full night of sleep in over a year. Excuse the bags under my eyes. But I know for a fact, having been a conservative activist and a pro-life activist on a college campus for many years myself, you all experience those moments as well. And you're probably experiencing a whole lot more of them today than I ever did back in 2017, 2018, and 2019, if only because the country is so radically different, even in the last 6 months, than it ever has been before. It might be having another friend walk out of your life and say, you clearly weren't the person I thought you were if you support the President of the United States, or you believe in free speech, or you're following Christ above all else in your life. Maybe it's getting a bad grade on a paper, or getting protested for the zillionth time, or worse, getting death threats, threats of violence, and all kinds of horrible messages constantly slung at you because you are courageous about your values. But today, I just want to pour some encouragement into all of you, because what you are doing is so much bigger than changing people's hearts or minds. It's so much bigger than getting someone elected to the presidency of the United States. It's so much bigger than flipping the country from one color to the other. You are impacting people's souls simply because you have the courage to keep showing up again and again and again and again. St. Augustine once said, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." I think in 2026, we're rediscovering as a generation in real time that ultimately no government policy is going to save us. No influencer with a loud microphone is going to save our culture. Frankly, I've been on quite the bender on social media this week and just lately in general about how conservatives in office aren't even really conservative enough to save a whole lot of the problems that we're experiencing in society on behalf of our generation. No podcast host, no TikTok star, no reality TV face is ever going to save our culture. No viral own the libs moment on a college campus that you see on social media a few months later is ever going to save us. Ultimately, only submission to God, with hearts fully surrendered to Him and rooted in Jesus Christ, will save Western civilization. And that starts with you and me right here, right now, today or tomorrow, or whenever we have the courage to answer the question, am I ready to be sent into our culture? Ultimately, the disgusting, vile, insane attack on the family that we're seeing today is really rooted in something so much bigger. And it's kind of the thing you're not really allowed to say, or you get called all of the insane names by the mainstream media, by these crazy protest organizations, and even people seeking violence against you. This is a spiritual battle that has been waging for thousands and thousands of years, for centuries, for generations, by those who are possessed by the forces of evil to attempt to rid society of truth itself with a capital T, to rid society of God. There are powerful forces at play today who are doing everything they can to convince our generation, to convince you that God is dead, He's cringy, He's for old people, or believing in God is downright evil or bigoted or misogynistic or racist. Just today, I came across a teaser for a new CNN documentary that is being aired on Sunday. It's an hour-long feature film that is an expose on the rise of what they're calling Christian nationalism in America. What I can only describe as a hit job, this movie is a direct attack on all people of Charlie Kirk for his influence in our generation and the rise of dangerous, what they call radical activation of Americans who are proud to be American to believe fully in the presence of God in our country. The host of the show today on the air at CNN said this to tease her new movie coming out on Sunday, which I actually think I may want to watch. At first, I was really annoyed this was coming out, and now I think this is going to be maybe the most entertaining thing I've seen in a while. If you're unfamiliar, this is what she said. Christian nationalism is the ideology rooted in the belief that America was founded as a Christian nation and that our laws and beliefs should reflect Christian values. Yeah, America was founded as a Christian nation, and our laws and beliefs as a society do reflect Christian values. In fact, the book of Deuteronomy, more than the Magna Carta, more than John Locke, more than any other secular piece of literature, is the most quoted thing that established America's laws, our founding documents, our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, and so much more. But that's precisely it, right? That's the big secret. Virtually none of what we're living through right now in 2026 is a political issue. None of it. And that's the unique call to action that our generation is having to navigate in real time. Abortion and the fight against it is not about politics. The food that we're eating and the fight to make America healthy again is not about politics. The continued fight for free speech on college campuses, just like this one we're seeing all over the world, is not about politics. They, the forces of evil, go after innocent babies because they are a reflection of humanity's creation in God's divine image. They go after the family because God's intentional design for marriage and parenthood is a reflection of His unconditional love for us. They go after our country because we were founded to be a Christian nation, and the West's values have always been rooted in Christian theology. They go after the church because it stands as an immovable link back towards Christ for 2,000 years, Christ Himself. They go after freedom because freedom is not man's idea. No, liberty is instead from God. More importantly, they go after what is good and true and beautiful because they are terrified that they can't compete against it. And honestly, they can't. They truly can't. Evil and the shallow promises that it provides for temporary treasure and value and wealth in this world will never be able to compete with the abundant grace of God and the promises of eternal life. CNN feels the need to make that documentary coming out on Sunday precisely because the Holy Spirit is moving so powerfully through this generation, something that you all know and experience every single day. Last year, 2.5 million Bibles were sold in America, an 11% increase from the year before. Church attendance is at an all-time high in our country. People in every single diocese across America joining the church this year are breaking records for new confirmations this Easter season. Mass baptisms are happening on our college campuses. Today, right now, as I am telling you this, the #1 app on the App Store on your phone is a Catholic prayer app called Hallow. It is getting more downloads this week than ChatGPT. We have been starved by people with the loudest microphones and the biggest spheres of influence, rooted in evil for far too long in our culture of what really matters in life. They want you to find your identity through your pronouns, through your career, through your woke activism, through your politics, through, I don't know what's happening in New York, the warmth of collectivism. Do not let them. Do not let evil come back swinging in the midst of the greatest revival our generation has ever seen, and arguably many generations before us never had the chance to see. What I want to leave you with today, before we open it up for questions, is one message. It does not take fame and glory and wealth and riches and 1 million followers and blue check marks on social media and access to cable news to change the world. All it takes are simple, quiet acts of courage. It's the courage to date with the intention of really committing to someone for the rest of your life, to actually fall in love, to get married and become someone's partner in crime for life. It's the courage, as young women are doing across the political spectrum today, to quit our hormonal birth control because we're tired of taking slow-release poison that's making us sick and destroying our intimate lives, destroying our mental health, and destroying our physical health along the way. It's the courage to be willing to bring new life into the world when everything on your TikTok feed is screaming at you about how selfishness and the girl with the list matter a whole lot more than pregnancy or childbirth. I'm so grateful to be walking through this journey of new motherhood with so many of my friends at the same time. And in fact, we have a really cute little group chat with myself and Brett Cooper and Riley Gaines where we send baby pictures every single day. We were texting just a few minutes before I came out and spoke to you today. Finding the community and the journey to go through that with other young families as well. It's the courage to eat real food instead of processed crap and to nourish yourself and take care of yourself and have responsibility for your own future. And most importantly, it's the courage of spending Sunday mornings in a church pew instead of doom scrolling on your phone. That is not always easy. And in fact, sometimes it is going to be incredibly hard. When we're asking you to do these things, I'm not doing so completely naively, unaware of the consequences, that you may lose some friends along the way in this journey. You may get a bad grade on an exam or a bad grade in a class here in your college experience. You may lose a job or get kicked off social media. Been there for all of those things. And what we've been powerfully reminded of in the last 6 months is in the most radical, extreme circumstances, we may even lose our lives for the cause of liberty and the cause of freedom. But just as our founding fathers and mothers understood 250 years ago in 1776 that liberty is not man's idea, it is God's idea, what greater honor to serve our society than being willing to give all of it to God in complete surrender and to keep answering that question, am I ready, with here I am, Lord, send me. I spent some time last November on the campaign trail with a bunch of the candidates, actually before November in the primary cycle, with a bunch of the candidates running for president. And when I was in Iowa with Vivek Ramaswamy in the midst of the bomb cyclone storm the day of the Iowa primary, it was a crazy day. I will never forget 6 or 7 times, I didn't even mean to do that, he said in a media interview throughout the day that what we're seeing in 2024, and I think it's more poignant now in 2026, is a 1776 style revolution. Not literally with arms and weapons and being on battlefields, but we are seeing a 1776 style revolution to redefine culture for our next generation of Americans with our choices and in the conversations we're having about our values and the beliefs that tie us together as Americans. I'm not one for numerology. I'm not a huge numerology fan. I'm not like the hyper Taylor Swift fans that go through all of the music videos and see that the clock is pointed to this minute hand and that correlates with the album cover from several years ago and that color means something. It's never been my favorite. But if there's anything interesting to me about numerology, it's this. The average length of an empire throughout all of human history is 250 years for a rise and fall of any empire we've ever seen. And we forget that because we think about the fall of Rome taking hundreds of years and the Roman Empire really lasting for centuries. But right now in America, we have, for lack of a better term, a turning point in front of us to either continue with the greatest civilization the world has ever known, rooted in our identity as one nation under God, built around that central foundation of the American family, or to let it all crumble and let it all fall apart. 2026 is a 1776 style revolution. And as a generation, it's up to us to courageously choose goodness, to choose truth, to choose beauty, and to wake up every day and say, here I am, Lord, send me. Thank you all for your yes in the work that you are already doing on this campus and beyond. And let's open it up and answer some questions.
My name is Abby. I am a first-year student. I'm studying childhood education.
Awesome.
I actually had a couple questions for you, but my most important one was, what advice do you have for me as a young woman in a healthy relationship who plans to marry young and have children?
Oh, great question. I'll repeat it for those that didn't hear. What advice do you have for me as a young woman in a healthy relationship who plans to marry young? And what was the last part?
And to have kids.
And to have kids. Beautiful. Marriage is the most powerful and sanctifying journey truly I have ever been on in my life. And I can tell you that more importantly than the age you get married at, the biggest question that you should be going into any relationship with is, who am I marrying? The choice that you are making in your spouse, whether this is for a young man or a young woman listening, is not just the person that makes you laugh and you can sing in long car rides with and you dance in the kitchen with while you're making dinner and you have similar hobbies and a similar sense of humor. Ultimately, this kind of sounds morbid, but the choice that you're making in a spouse is the person that's going to get you through the birth of your children, through diagnoses of cancer in your parents and having to watch your parents get let go, through mortgage payments, through crises, through all of it. And I think ultimately the biggest thing you should ask yourself on whether you're discerning whether the person you're dating for marriage right now is in fact the person that is right for you to marry is, can this person be the person that I can link arms and surrender everything to God with? Because the more you place your spouse as the God of your life and expecting you to fulfill them, to fulfill all of your needs and you to fulfill all of their needs, the harder marriages tend to get. But if you all can rely on that solid foundation together, understanding that marriage ultimately is a cord of 3 strands woven together, not just the 2 of you, that the more the 2 of you are walking towards God together, the closer you're going to be as well. That's the most important thing to prioritize. So take the time to discern that. Don't feel the need to just rush into a marriage immediately. I know that's a lot of what we're seeing on social media right now, and rightfully so, in the overcorrection response to what our society has been living through with demonizing marriage for so long. But we can't just be advocating for more marriage. We need to be advocating for stronger and more healthy and more prosperous marriages too. And as for kids, I can answer that as well. Children, I think it's just so sad to me that kids are presented to young women as the thing that's going to destroy the rest of your life. And I maybe noticed it, but I never noticed it quite as loud until I was pregnant with my daughter. And from every direction, my social media feeds, the algorithms, everything was feeding me this constant narrative that my job was going to suffer, that my marriage was going to suffer, my personal friendships were going to suffer. I would never take a trip or travel ever again. I was never going to have the life that I have before. And I think in some ways, they're not mistaken about that concept, that your life is fundamentally different and that you are going to be a completely different human being once you hold your baby in your arms for the first time. But I have become more patient, more grateful, more reliant upon God. I have prioritized myself less and found myself praying every day, less of me, Lord, more of you. I've become softer and in many ways doing my best every day to be more kind and understanding to the people around me. And I certainly have not had to abandon my career or my sense of adventure or any of my personal relationships along the way. I don't think the me that existed a year ago, even being pregnant with my daughter, would recognize who I am today in all of the best ways. And I wish that's how we presented it to young women, right? Because Jordan Peterson very eloquently says this about young men, that young men, you cannot buy into this lie that you are perfect just the way you are, right? Everything in culture is telling you you're perfect just the way you are, but how much of a shallow lie is that? Would you really want to die when you were 17 years old as that version of yourself? Hopefully, God willing, you won't, because let's be honest, that version of you was probably wildly selfish and a little stupid and very rash, and you made some pretty tough decisions. I tend to look at parenthood the exact same way. Would I really want to limit myself to just the selfish desires and experiences and routines of my own life? Or am I willing to let my heart explode and grow a million different directions that was never possible before I brought my daughter into the world? So 100% worth pursuing, and I couldn't recommend it enough.
I have one more question for you. I saw a TikTok from you last year where you mentioned a book called Animal Farm
Mm,
by George Orwell.
mm-hmm.
I currently am trying to read the book 1984.
Great book, one of my
Um,
faves.
my question for you is, do you have any advice on how to read this book efficiently in a way that would help me better understand it?
Ugh. Did you guys have to read 1984 mandatorily? Some of you did, but some of you didn't. Raise your hand if you never had to read George Orwell in school. A handful. This is insane to me that it's not mandatory reading for everyone. I was in Scotland over New Year's. I'm spending a lot more time in the UK these last few years, as long as they'll let me. I'm sure they'll kick me out in about 5 minutes, as they just did my My friend Ava of Lardingerbrook has been banned from the UK for a little while because she's too radical as a Christian. But I was in a bookstore in Scotland and I saw a whole stack of George Orwell novels, including many that I hadn't read yet. And it dawned on me, they must not have this as required reading here in the UK either anymore, because it really looks more like an instruction manual for society, reading 1984 than a dire warning as it was when it was written. 1984, I think you'll have an easier time reading it if you're approaching the book as a fiction story. Don't think about the larger political implications of any of it until after you're done, and that will help you understand the world that George Orwell has created and immersed that main character Winston in, and then you'll be able to see all of the parallels to what we're experiencing in society after the fact. Animal Farm, the video that you're referencing, is a favorite book of mine. It always has been. If you're a pretty fast reader, you can read it in an hour or a couple of hours. You can easily finish it in an afternoon. Much shorter and an easier read than 1984. It is perhaps the world's most famous critique of Stalinism, of communism, as we saw in the USSR, as everything that goes wrong in an authoritarian society, and how it's presented as equality, but really it's the death of society through equity in taking the ceiling and bringing it down for everyone, and ultimately only enriching the powerful elitists that are running the society, right? Amazingly, I'm very terrified. They're turning it into a children's movie that's coming out the first weekend of May, and allegedly the whole message has been changed. That they actually are saying capitalism is destroying society, when in reality the entire point of Animal Farm was that communism destroys society. So I'm very hesitant about going to see it with my daughter, which I was excited about. But I would highly suggest that one as well. If you're finding 1984 really dense and difficult to get through, it is a much larger, more difficult and adult level read. Animal Farm is really easy to get through and delivers a very similar message.
Thank you.
And read George Orwell, for goodness sakes. Go out there, do it. Books matter, especially because we're just not doing it anymore in our education system, which is crazy.
Hi, my name is JP. I'm a sophomore here and I'm a political science major. Before I ask my question, I do want to say I am a liberal, but I am happy that you are here because I think free speech is under threat in this country by both sides. And I think it is so brave of you to do this and to continue the legacy of Charlie Kirk.
Thank you.
Even if I disagreed with some of your points, I think so
We
brave.
welcome disagreement. That's what our country's all about.
So my questions, so as I said, I'm a liberal. Let's say I like a girl who's a conservative. If do you think that could work in this society now? And if it could, how do you think it would?
Can I ask you a question of my own? Why would you say today you are a liberal? What values do you espouse that you think qualify you as a political liberal?
Well, lots of social issues. I'm liberal. I'm liberal on lots of economic issues, including, let's say, the minimum wage. I am pro-choice, even though I do think there are better options than abortion. Like, I do believe healthcare is a human right, even though I do understand the disagreement. So that's how I would describe myself.
You seem awfully open-minded and tolerant about the whole thing.
Yeah, I call myself an old school liberal.
Yeah, so interestingly, I would argue the Democrat Party that existed in the time of JFK, or even our parents' Democrat Party, really doesn't exist today. And this is part of the interesting turning point that we're, for lack of a better term, experiencing as a generation right now. Last November, though he will never get any credit for it in the mainstream media, and in fact is always attacked as being far too radical for society, President Trump kind of broke the political system in this country. Regardless of what you think about the guy, if you can zoom out to the 30,000-foot level, he did something completely unprecedented in creating this concept of a unity party, right? Never before, at least in modern history, in our grandparents' lifetime, has someone like an RFK and a Tulsi Gabbard been able to be so successful in someone like a Donald Trump and J.D. Vance administration, and they share the same vision and goals for America. So ultimately, I think there's an interesting conversation to be had right now about the fracturing of the political left and what that's going to look like, because I think a whole lot of people like you are politically homeless right now and you're looking for the right avenue and direction to go in. But you're no longer represented by today's Democrat Party, and certainly by the loudest voices on the left that are undoubtedly sprinting towards a Zohran Mamdani, Abigail Spanberger, extreme AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib level leftism that is not coherent with classically liberal values like free speech and free markets and the opportunity to have these conversations, certainly religious freedom and so much more. So an interesting sidebar to ponder in your life, but do I think interpolitical marriages work still and relationships work still in today's society? Potentially, but ultimately, I would never give the advice to someone to go into a marriage lacking the same general value system and particularly religious value system for the rest of your life. Ultimately, marriage is a covenant. It is so much bigger than a contract. It's not just a piece of paper that you can throw away and choose to dissolve at any time in your life. Our legal concept of marriage is finite and temporary. And when we look at it that way, the very sanctity of marriage has been destroyed, right? It's why half of us in our generation were raised by divorced parents, because we looked at it as something transactional. If it no longer suits me, I immediately throw it away. And we lack the sense of self-sacrifice, of serving something bigger than ourselves, whether that's our spouse, our family, or certainly God, that is the umbrella over all of it. So I think it would be a very unique situation today, but not impossible per se, if it's something that you guys could figure out together, as long as you share that same general value foundation base.
Because I am a Catholic as well, so I do. And let's never mind. I won't get into
No, this
it.
is interesting to me.
No, because then people might suspect someone. But like, let's say the person, we are both Christians. Let's say,
yeah.
Could it all? Even though I know people say liberals can't really be Christians, even though I disagree with that. Do you think the religious thing's also important as well?
Wildly important,
Yeah.
hugely important. And that's not to say you have to necessarily share the exact same denomination of Christianity. When I met my husband, we did not. Now we do. But that was something we wrestled with a lot, and we discerned together that unless we were going to the same church building every Sunday morning and that we were raising our children with that same value base, it did not make sense for us to get married, no matter how much we loved each other. And that was understanding that we were trying to build something bigger than just our immediate finite feelings ourselves. But I'm excited for you, and go ask her out. I saw a video the other day from Chris Williamson. Do you guys listen to Chris Williamson's podcast ever, Modern Wisdom? It's really good. I highly recommend. He had someone on, and they were talking about statistically when guys are willing to put themselves out there and in person ask a girl out on a date, in person, ask a girl out on a date or ask for her phone number or whatever, well over 9 times out of 10, she'll say yes. The problem is that no one's asking anymore. And I get it that you guys have been culturally conditioned not to ask, because women say that we're so feminist, don't hold the door open for me, don't put my bag on the airplane in the overhead bin for me, how dare you ask me on a date, I have to ask you on a date. I get the hesitation and the fear, but I guarantee you 9 times out of 10, if you're just willing to put yourself out there and have that quiet, active courage, you'll probably have a pretty great result.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Luke, and I'm an accounting major here, first year student, and I'd like to ask, how do you talk to people who think you hate them because of your beliefs?
How do you talk to people who think you hate them because of your beliefs? I'm still figuring that one out in real time, to be honest. But I think so much of it has to do with the best piece of advice I ever got getting into the world of content creation and public speaking, which amazingly was from Charlie. And he told me when I was a student, I asked him once, how the heck do you just sit there while people scream in your face and just say the most vile, crazy things, and you sit there with your tea and you laugh and you smile and you say, thanks so much for being here. He said, there's one secret. You always have to keep your heart rate lower than the person that you're talking to. And if you can take a really deep breath and allow yourself not to get worked up by the but freaking out angry people, you will probably have a really interesting conversation. And actually, you may be able to bring them down to a more realistic level to converse back and forth. And they'll realize, you know, this guy's not that crazy. He's not a huge racist or an evil misogynist or whatever. Now we can have some common ground to start with. And the common ground piece is also hugely important, because if you're completely coming from different worldviews and wildly different perspectives that are competing with one another, ultimately you'll never be able to get anything done in a conversation, right? So I have found it's really effective not to throw the baby out with the bathwater on the facts don't care about your feelings Ben Shapiro worldview. I love Ben. I was on the phone with him earlier this morning. Ben's worldview that we often cite in the conservative movement of facts don't care about your feelings worked really, really, really well for millennials. it is not working for Generation Z, and it's time for a new playbook, because maybe it was the SEL, social emotional learning education, that we all grew up with in the school system. Maybe it's because with one tap of these devices, we can call virtually any human being on any face of the globe and instantly connect with them. We are a very feelings, empathy first driven generation. And that has been successfully hijacked virtually by one side of the political system for far too long, to the point that we've created this narrative: if you're not a raging leftist, or if you're not a huge abortion activist, or you're not marching in the streets against ICE and running people over with your car, then you are an evil, horrible bigot who hates me, and I am personally threatened by you. In reality, the positions that I'm advocating for, and that people like Ben and Charlie and Matt Walsh and Michael Knowles and so many others are spending time behind a microphone advocating for every day, are indeed coming from a place of compassion, right? I get asked this a lot related to abortion. I get the proverbial, well, what if there is a 10-year-old girl who was raped by her father and it's an incest situation and she's 10, and you're really going to force this horrible situation to have to go through with pregnancy and end up in childbirth? How evil of you to say. And I always like to back up and say, we share the same horrifying concern for this beautiful young woman, proverbial, who has been taken advantage of, and the extreme trauma that she has had to experience because of evil and horrible people in her life. Because I care so much about what this young woman has already experienced, why would I want to put her through more trauma in her life that's only going to make things worse? In abortion facilities, for example, we have now learned in Europe that there are studies being conducted. We don't have the same reporting laws in America, so they'll never conduct these studies here. But in Denmark, they've discovered that through all the data they're experiencing through abortion facilities, you are 6 times more likely in your life to commit suicide later on in your life if you had an abortion versus if you had given birth to your baby, whether you placed that baby with an adoptive family or you raised your child yourself. That's insane. That is the least compassionate thing that we could possibly do for a young woman who is already experiencing probably some really extreme feelings of suicidation and wondering why her life even has value anymore. Similarly, the gender transition conversation, right? Everyone says, if you really care about this 12-year-old girl who looks in the mirror and she doesn't feel like herself, and clearly she was born in the wrong body, and we just want her to feel comfortable, so the best thing that we can possibly do for her is to chop off her breasts and to chemically castrate herself and literally destroy the entirety of who she is to make it something else, and then she'll look in the mirror and she'll feel comfortable and happy. That makes no logical sense when it comes to actual compassion for this young woman. I want more for her than mutilation and castration. I want her to feel comfortable in her own skin that she was born in and to fall in love with who she really was. So I think if we can start with the common ground of we have real compassion for people, and because we have compassion for people and we want to make life better for people, here's how we do it. We advocate against abortion. We advocate against child gender transition. We advocate against communism that has taken more lives as an economic institutional facility than any other economic system in human history. And instead, we fight for stuff like capitalism, which has advanced wealth and brought more people out of poverty than any system in human history. And you could keep going through every single policy bucket area. But that, I think, is really causing people to go, huh, because all I've ever heard from conservatives, these evil, crazy people in the past, is that facts don't care about your feelings, and the facts do matter, but when we can marry them with feelings, we have such a powerful vehicle to transform society, because how do you argue against objective truth when you also get to feel it in your heart?
Um, Hi, my name is Nathaniel. I am a sophomore technology education major. And as someone who is going into the education field and like into the public school system, most likely, just wondering what advice you'd give
Hmm.
as a conservative Christian going into a space that is normally pretty monopolized by a lot of secular beliefs.
Thank God for you, first of all. The question is, going into the education system, what advice do you have for someone who's generally conservative wanting to work in public schools? My heart goes out to you. I know we have another education major here. Anyone else trying to go into teaching or education? A handful of people. Thank God for you, truly, because what I am hearing out of kids who are slightly older than my daughter, our friends who have kids that age, is horrifying, not just in the public school system, by the way, across the entire education system in America. It's tough for me to give you really substantial advice because I think in the next 6 months to a year, the entire public institution of education is going to be dramatically different with the abolishment of the education department actually getting into motion in Washington, D.C. But I would say this, as a parent myself, even knowing what I know about religious education and private schools, my family is dead set on homeschooling our kids. And I think there is an interesting new avenue being led by young parents who are younger millennials and older Gen Zers of kind of bringing back the concept of a one-room schoolhouse, that maybe your reality isn't available to sit down at the kitchen counter and educate your children yourself every single day, but 10 families can get together and do a homeschool co-op with an amazing teacher who wants to teach kids at different levels and go at their own pace and do all of that. That has been wildly successful, and I've spent the last few months touring a couple of different facilities that are doing stuff like this across the country. One's in Idaho, one's in Florida. We did a whole episode of my show about the one in Idaho, actually, that's a nature-based play school, which is really cool. That said, not everyone can do that, nor should we do that, because it is our obligation to go into the heart of culture and try to change it from the inside out, right? I've always believed that. It's why I have always been an advocate of being on platforms like TikTok, even when all of the conservatives swore it off, because that's where young people were. And if we're serious about transforming people's hearts and minds, we have to go into the heart of culture to be there and be a part of that conversation. For your own sake, I probably would advocate for you, especially as education is getting kicked back to state governments, to go find a beautiful, thriving red state to be a public school teacher in, if only because places like Colorado, where I grew up, have become so unbelievably fundamentally radical that you will instantaneously lose your job if you disagree with some of these insane pushes for indoctrination. Right now in the Colorado state government, they're pushing through a bill to mandate teaching first graders about everything trans ideology in all of the public schools. It's really, really crazy. We certainly have seen very similar things here in New York. I'm currently living in Virginia, which we don't even need to have the conversation about how psycho Virginia is becoming. But I am hearing great things out of places like Florida and North Dakota and Wyoming and Idaho and all of these amazing communities that are really trying to put quality education back at the heart of America's classroom again. So thank you for your service to this next generation, and best of luck to you, because you guys are going to need all of our support and prayers for sure.
Of course. And if I could say one
Yeah.
more thing, actually, I actually was homeschooled by my mom, up until I got to high school, and I know at least for me, having that like foundation of knowing what was right, then when I went into a public school, it wasn't like a question of like, huh, is what the
Yeah.
teacher's saying was right or not? It was like, hey, I know what's right, I know what's wrong, and if they're not going to teach what's right, then I'll just have to believe it for myself. So,
Amen.
yeah.
Amen to that. Thank you. That was really beautiful. Anything else? Any of you guys have any questions? Would love to have an interesting conversation. You're more than welcome. I'm an open book. Yeah, jump on in. If you can talk into the microphone, that would be helpful.
I was just gonna ask, do you think that women are bad people if they don't want to have children?
No, not at all. That's a great question. Are women bad people if they don't want to have children? No. And truly, I don't fault women today for not wanting to have children right now. Almost half of women age 18 to 44 in America say that they don't want children. I believe the exact statistic is 47%. Pew Research just put out a huge study about this. And it's not hard to understand why, right? If every single headline and every influencer and every politician and every movie and every professor on your campus is telling you kids ruin your life, kids are going to hold you back, run away from kids as much as possible, clearly that is the direction our society is going to go in. The thing I would encourage you to embrace is maybe the concept that you may not recognize what your life looks like after having children, but that might not be a horrible bad thing. It might be a really beautiful thing. But parenting is a very specific vocation, just as marriage is. It's a calling for the rest of your life. And if it's not something that you're wildly passionate about or ready to dive headfirst into, I would not recommend it for you necessarily. Yeah.
I've actually been told the opposite. Like a lot of people do urge, I guess, women or me myself to like have kids, but it's just not something that I want for myself. It's not even because of what people are saying. Like if people are urging me not to have kids, it's not even because of that. I
Yeah.
don't want that to happen to my body.
You know, a lot of people feel that way, which is a-okay. And you're saying it's mostly from a physical perspective. Yeah, you don't want to experience pregnancy itself. I mean, there's a really simple solution to that, and it's not a fancy, flashy answer that society really loves, but it's embracing a life of abstinence and making sure that that's not something that your life will ever confront in the future. Historically, that's why we had nuns and religious communities of women living together, and men weren't a part of the equation. And priests, similarly, in a similar experience, don't live with women, and they never have the question in their minds of whether they're going to have children in the future. But thank you for sharing that with me, and I'm actually quite encouraged to know that there are a whole lot of people out there encouraging you to have children, because that certainly isn't what I'm often hearing on college campuses today. Anybody else have a question? Yeah, jump in.
So you said your thoughts on like gender transitioning in children, but do you think that adults should be able to make the choice of what they want to do with their bodies? And I know your views on abortion and that it's like the fetus's body, but from a perspective of um from gender transitioning, do you think that adults should be able to do what they want with their bodies since it's not there's no debate of it impacting anybody else?
Yeah, sure. I think there's an interesting conversation to be had on whether or not it does indeed impact everybody else. Certainly, there has been a massive societal change in the last decade that we've never seen before. The more our society has normalized sex change surgeries, most experts studying this are really calling this a social contagion that has trickled down into the lives of children, right? Statistically speaking, it is impossible that the number of kids who identify as trans or non-binary today are actually trans or non-binary. And what you saw a generation ago was less than 1% of society, depending on who you looked at, maybe even less than 0.5% of society that was experiencing something like gender dysphoria. And now some studies are saying 20+% of our generation says that they are trans or non-binary or somehow questioning their gender. That, I believe, is a consequence of the normalization of these types of procedures. But ultimately, the big thing that I am fighting for every single day is to protect the innocence of our kids. And I think most people are engaged in that fight in some capacity if they truly do have compassion for our children. Most developed countries in the West are starting to fight against this, by the way. The UK, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, all of these countries are virtually banning gender transition for children, even though they were the first countries to introduce it in the first place, because they are now saying that there is not sufficient evidence that would help in any specific way transitioning a child when they are young versus waiting until they are an adult. And it looks like the United States is kind of playing catch up with that at the state level, but it depends on who you're talking to, obviously. Yeah, continue.
I think you said actually trans and non-binary. So do you think those are identities that do like exist within people like in
I think people have experienced gender dysphoria as a mental condition for many, many, many generations. And until about 5 minutes ago in society, we did classify it as such in the DSM, just as people have experienced other mental illnesses throughout human history. But our treatment protocol for it, switching to the affirmative care model, has not been a net positive or a net benefit for people struggling with gender dysphoria, or certainly for society at large. I don't find that to be the more compassionate choice and route to take, just as I would never want to affirm people struggling with anxiety or depression or suicidation or substance abuse or schizophrenia and saying, yes, you're struggling with all these things. I see you. I affirm you. Now let's make you more anxious and more depressed and more suicidal. And that's how you're going to come out on the other end of this, if that makes sense. Yeah. Right here.
What about the fact that transition surgeries have some of the highest satisfaction rates among those surgeries?
Depends on the study you're looking for. And you're saying for kids in particular? Okay. The question was, what about transition surgeries having really high satisfaction rates? In reality, almost every single major clinical study that's out there, decades after the fact, is finding that there is a very substantial factor of regret that our society really never talks about. And more often than not, especially with young adults in their late adolescent years and into their early 20s, the feelings of gender dysphoria go away the later you get into adulthood and you experience gender affirming experiences. I'll tell you a story about that actually that's really sat with me a lot as I've wrestled with how to approach this issue. In the last few years, I'm sure you're very familiar with a young woman by the name of Chloe Cole. She's become quite famous across the country for being one of the first very vocal detransitioners. She was given a double mastectomy at age 15 in the state of California after she was put on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones at age 12. And the first time that I met her and she was telling me her experience and her story, she said after this surgery, she almost immediately felt regret, but she instantly went to the internet, to the online forums of the people that had been encouraging her to transition, and expressed her elation and her gratitude that finally she feels comfortable as a boy, even though inside she felt really, really regretful almost immediately. So that certainly factors into a lot of these studies that are surveying people right after surgery. And a few years later, when she was a junior in high school, she was sitting in her psychology class, and they started talking about various human relationships and partnerships and bonds that are formed between different people, what that does to you psychologically. They started teaching this class about breastfeeding, which, men, bear with me, I know the cringe, right? But it actually is really important. They started talking about breastfeeding, and they started talking about how the bond between a breastfeeding mom and a baby hormonally is unlike anything else you will ever experience in your life. And certainly that's what I've experienced this last year, breastfeeding my daughter, which by the grace of God I am still doing, about 10 months in. But I have never felt the feeling of falling in love more with another human being like I have when I've been nourishing my daughter from my breasts. And she was in this class and just immediately started bursting into tears because she realized this is what I allowed to be taken from me, is something I never thought I ever would have wanted. I never had a personal proclivity towards. I didn't even think I wanted children at some point, but I will never now even have the option to have this experience later in my life because I have taken it away from myself by those who were supposed to protect me, and they really didn't when I was in a vulnerable situation. That to me is so profoundly heartbreaking, whether someone is 15 years old or 25 years old, because let's be honest, when I was 25, even now to the point that I'm almost 29 in May, I was a completely different person a few years ago. All of us have probably reinvented ourselves many, many, many times over, from 15 to 18, 18 to 20, 20 to 25. And I think we owe so much more to young adults who are struggling with this than to take away the beautiful gender affirming experiences of their lives that are available to them, like breastfeeding or successful intimacy experience in sexual relationships, and so much more, in a hurry to affirm them today, when in reality we could help them reconnect with who they were meant to be in the first place later on. So it really, to answer your question about studies, it really does depend on the study you're looking at, and I would encourage you to look at some that are much farther out instead of surveying people's immediate experiences, because I have spoken to hundreds of people this last year in researching the detransition movement and why it's becoming so has such a high proclivity to go viral right now on social media, because all of these young people say instantly, I would have told you, thank God, I'm finally me. I'm finally affirmed in my body. And within hours, days, weeks, months, or even years, all of a sudden they realize I no longer have the chance to connect with who I once was and who ultimately I would like to be in my life because I took that away from myself. Yeah, continue.
And what about the people who do end up truly feeling happy after transition?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not denying that people do feel happy in their lives, but ultimately, I think we just have to ask ourselves as a society, do we want more for people than telling people the only way to feel comfortable in your own skin is to fundamentally, physically mutilate yourself and to castrate yourself in order to feel acceptance when you look in the mirror? I think when you phrase it that way, it's a much different conversation than the surface level compassion that we often discuss in our culture, right? Of course, we want people to love themselves. Of course, we want people to look in the mirror and feel happy with what they're seeing. Of course, we want people to feel a sense of acceptance with their own identity. But why is it then that we have to fundamentally change everything about someone for them to experience that, rather than figuring out a truly compassionate way for them to find that with who they already are? I find it to be a pretty gross exploitation of people who are experiencing gender dysphoria, the movement and the industry that we have built on this that is costing thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars for someone who's already in a vulnerable state to take advantage of them even further, fundamentally change everything about themselves, and then send them out the door and say, have fun with your new life now. We'd never really addressed the underlying problem of looking in the mirror and not recognizing who you see. And that, I think, is really stemming from the affirmative care model. So I'm not denying that people certainly look in the mirror and feel happier. For young women especially, this could be like a 4-hour PhD level dissertation conversation, by the way, but for young women especially, more often than not, what we're seeing with young women transitioning much earlier right now is right in the middle of puberty. And not to get very graphic right now, but women, we've all been through puberty. Who actually liked themselves when you were going through puberty? No one. It is the most uncomfortable, horrible, embarrassing experience. You genuinely feel fat and ugly. Your face is breaking out. Everyone else looks beautiful and you feel so uncomfortable and awkward and ugly. Everybody else has it figured out and you don't. And that's a universal young women's experience, largely because of the hormone balances that are trying to figure themselves out in our bodies every day. When women are given mass injections of testosterone right in the heart of when our progesterone and our estrogen are all over the place at the beginning of puberty, everything kind of equalizes out and you feel really great. You feel fantastic. You feel super happy, and you're looking in the mirror, you feel really confident. Some of your fat goes away in your face and around your midsection or in your underarms where you were feeling really awkward before and bulky and weird and not fitting into your clothes. So of course, you're gonna look in the mirror and see somebody muscular and trim and fit. You're gonna feel really confident because of the boost that the artificial hormones are giving you, but that doesn't necessarily lend itself to long-term satisfaction and comfortability inside your own body. And when we start looking at it that way, of just wanting more for people than a temporary high from an artificial injection, but true lasting fulfillment and satisfaction in your true identity, that's where we can make meaningful change in society for people who are struggling with gender dysphoria. Anybody else? Any questions? Yeah.
You Catholic or Christian?
Am I Catholic or Christian? Both. I am a Catholic Christian. Yes.
If you don't mind, can I ask if you participate in Lent, and if so, what did you give up for Lent?
Do I participate in Lent? And if so, what did I give up? I do participate in Lent. Happy day after Ash Wednesday. The last couple of years, I have spent time trying to reframe my concept of Lent because I kind of felt convicted that I was just doing the easy cop out. What am I giving up for 40 days? Like chocolate or sugar, so things that weren't really hard for me to say I gave it up and then just immediately to go back to that behavior. So I tried to approach Lent the last few years from a different sacrificial perspective, not to give something up, but instead to do something more challenging. And so I'm doing a few things this year that are a little bit different from things I've done before, one of which is a daily reflection. What's the word I'm looking for? It's a daily prayer reflection devotional through the Hallow app. I highly recommend Hallow. It has totally changed my life in how I've incorporated prayer into my daily routine. It's like 5 to 10 minutes of basically listening to a podcast episode every day, and it has been truly life-changing in when I'm getting ready for the day, or I'm driving to go pick up groceries, or I'm winding down before bed at night instead of just doom scrolling for 3 hours on TikTok. So I'm listening to that every day. I'm reading scripture every day. I'm trying to get outside every single day, which has been really challenging as a show host with a baby. I'm an outside girly. I always have been growing up in Colorado, and it's just really tough living in the city now with a baby and constantly being chained to a camera and a microphone. So that's kind of the big challenges that I'm engaging in right now. But love Lent. It's one of my favorite times of the whole year. And it gets a bad rap because it's so doom and gloom. We're all dying. Remember your death. But I've actually found such beautiful spiritual depth in it the last few years about connecting with mortality in a meaningful way that you can't take it with you, basically. So what are you living for every day? Any last questions before we jump into our meet and greet? I think we're right at 7:30, but I'll take a couple more if there are any out there. No. Well, thank you guys so much, everyone, for being here, truly. And just know that we see you guys every single day. It is hard to show up and be loud and proud and out there with your values on a college campus right now. It was hard several years ago when I was in college, and what you guys are experiencing today is night and day more difficult than anything I ever faced. Thank you for your courage. What you guys do, setting up these tables on campus and handing out buttons and flyers and putting on events like this one, takes real guts. A lot more than posting a 15-second TikTok video on the internet and putting your face out there that way. So I'm very truly grateful for everything you guys are doing, and thank you truly for everything you're doing. Okay.